What would it take to arouse your life, to experience more connection, more pleasure, more realness, in and outside of the bedroom? I'm August McLaughlin, and this is Girl Boner Radio.
These diagnoses are going to keep coming. We're going to have divorces. We're going to have breakups. We're going to have awful things that happen in our life. Those tigers are going to show up. So how do we, instead of trying to push them away, how do we invite them in for tea? Recognize that they're there actually to help us realize what's important to us, and then transfer all of that stress energy into something that is useful.
Dr. Rebecca Heiss is a stress physiologist, keynote speaker, and author. Before a life-changing phone call some years ago, her intro here would be very different. We'll get to that. But first, a little girl boner walk down memory lane. Rebecca grew up in a household she described as liberal and sex positive, but she also felt really protected from the outside world and a bit shy around the topic of sex.
I was such a sheltered kid. I literally looked up sex in the dictionary. I was probably like 8 years old, and I was just figuring out how to use a dictionary. And I was like, oh, I can look things up. This is so exciting. Talk about like the nerdiest of nerds. I remember my mom when I was probably maybe 9, 10-ish. My sister was 3 years older. So like she kind of sat us down together and had this whole conversation about masturbation and sex. And I was just like, I cannot believe my mother is talking about these things to me. It was so awkward despite her very best attempts. And it was me that was uncomfortable.
During her freshman year of high school, she had a pretty awesome sex ed teacher.
She spent the first day of sex ed asking us all to say, she's like, nobody will get in trouble. Just say every word you've ever heard associated with sex, genitals, like, let it rip. I was sitting back going, I know none of this. Like, what? This is a whole different language to me. It was so wonderful. It was such an open door experience for me to go, oh, okay, now we're all on the same page. How useful to have the tools and the language to be speaking to my peers. It was really, really freeing.
That same year, her sister came out as a lesbian.
This is the 90s. So this is like, it's been a minute. A lot has shifted in that time frame. I remember it being such a big deal. I come from a small town. We graduated 100 people. And so there's a lesbian among us. Oh, just this shocking ripple wave. And now it's just wonderful to see, like, yeah, okay. Like, yeah, not a thing that needs to be described or talked about in a shameful way.
Right. And knowing someone, being able to put a term that you might have had some ideas about with a person makes all the difference, doesn't it?
August, that was everything. Honestly, like, I don't think I've ever told her just how much courage and bravery that must have taken. Because all of the conversations turned to, here's what I thought about lesbians. Here's what I thought about like this whole genre of the LGBTQ plus community. But that's not Nancy. Like, we love Nancy. And suddenly this clicked of like, oh, these are humans. This is like one small itty bitty tiny bit of their identity, not the whole human. And so, yeah, that was a really formative thing for my childhood.
Growing into her own sexuality was an interesting experience for Rebecca. Rocky at first, but then full of discovery. I related to part of her experience, sort of in reverse.
I always wanted to be more of an adult than I was. And I think it came from this space of always feeling like I was behind. And so I tried to date much older men to begin with. And it worked. And I'm not saying it was the healthiest of relationships. In fact, there were some very predatory, pretty awful relationships from my early days. And as I developed and figured out, like, oh, this is not a mark of your worthiness. Like, your age, your maturity doesn't have to be represented by who you're dating or who you're with. I came into my own a little bit and discovered self-pleasure. Ooh, like, what is that? That's amazing. I don't actually need any of these partners because, frankly, it was many, many years before I had an orgasm from a partner. I'm like talking into my late 20s, probably. I mean, that's wild, right? This is what I believed women were supposed to be in sex. And once I kind of woke up to like, wait a second, my pleasure is probably just as important. Why does sex end when that happens? And I dated a woman, and that was a big shift as well. It was pretty wonderful.
That's amazing. It's such an incredible thing to discover something like that about yourself and your body when you have more emotional maturity. Like for me, self-pleasure came very late. I actually had the opposite. I orgasmed with partners and never by myself.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. But once I did, and I was about 30, the first time I masturbated to orgasm myself.
Wow.
And it was like another puberty, but like only the fun parts where you're kind of like curious about everything.
Yeah.
Did you have that feeling when you had this new experience?
It's so funny. I've never heard it described. I've never really thought about this so much. So thank you for putting me into my own discomfort, which is something I challenge people to do. This is great. Yeah, it was a whole new world. It really was, oh, what else is possible here? Wait, this is what other people are experiencing? Oh, well, let's try this. Let's try that. It was an awakening is the right term, I think there. Yeah.
At a certain point, about 10 years ago, she got married.
There was a piece of me that still needed marriage. That label was so important. And I didn't get married until I was, older. And so I needed that security to say, okay, now I can really be myself. I don't want to call him out because he's a lovely human being, but we were not compatible, is what I'll say.
An experience involving her sister's partner, Kim, helped her really see that after a pretty long history.
My sister met her partner in high school, fell madly in love, and they like to joke they were married 3 times. So they were married in Vermont when civil unions were first became legal, and then they were married in Canada, and then we finally, when they had the right to marry here, they were married a 3rd time. Kim was just this spark plug of life and love and joy and openness and curiosity, and really brought into my world a level of self-awareness that I sometimes didn't even like, right? Like she was the challenger. She's like, well, why would you do it that way? And I'm like, gosh, I don't, but she was just delightful and contagiously funny and just a wonderful person in my life, and such a model for love and deep connection in relationships. I have to say my love life probably suffered a little because I was constantly looking for what they had. And it's a gift. It's truly a gift.
One day, as Nancy and Kim were enjoying their 20th year of married life, something alarming happened.
My sister and Kim had been on a bike ride, got home from the bike ride, and Kim lost her ability to speak. It was just one of those moments that it's really terrifying. And they chalked it up to heat stroke, but obviously took her into the ER, had this imaging done, and then it was just this panicked evolution.
Rebecca was visiting her ill grandmother at the time. She was out for a walk when she received that unforgettable phone call.
And it was this beautiful day in June. I mean, just crystal clear blue skies. When you just get this feeling in your pit of your stomach. My phone rang and it was my sister. I just knew this was not, for whatever reason, that connection, it just was not good news. She said, look, I don't know how to say this. Kim's been diagnosed with a brain tumor. They're giving her a year. And it was just so surreal because it's so outside of your control. What do you do? What can you do? And immediately, human nature, I go into action. Who do I call? What can I do? How do I show up? And so I just remember calling my whole family that day, just out on this beautiful walk, and the juxtaposition between how alive the air was. It gives me chills to think about, because it was just, everything was so beautiful. And to carry that with this awful news, yeah, it stuck. It's definitely a crystallized memory.
Another memory involving Kim is one that Rebecca cherishes, one of those bittersweet ones.
I had this beautiful opportunity to talk with her the day before she died. She'd lost her ability to speak at that point, but really lived a very vibrant life, even up to the last week. remember we were trying to move her so she wouldn't develop bed sores this last week. And she almost fell off the bed. Like we kind of like almost dropped her. And she's like, I'm not going anywhere. And it was just this huge moment of joy. And like she held that joy for life right to the end. So she was a really special person.
When this all happened, Rebecca was living a life that many people would consider stable, secure, even ideal.
Generally in my life, I was in a safe place. I was married. I had a safe job, a job that I could keep for the rest of my life and retire from and be fine. I owned my own home.
Kim's illness led Rebecca to question her life decisions.
I mean, I think as soon as I got off the last phone call with my family of just like, that immediate silence of, oh, shoot, now what? Like, what does this all mean? And this sounds very selfish, but I'm going to give myself a pass in saying it also is very human in that I immediately thought about, if this had been my diagnosis, what would I want? And what would I want to experience? What would I want to do? How would I want to be remembered? And very quickly, I was like, this is not the life I want. And within the next month, I quit my job, sold my house, and divorced my husband.
She also decided she would write a book.
I was like, I have a book in me.
Wow. Had you been struggling emotionally before realizing all of that and making those decisions? Or was it kind of like a sudden wake-up call?
I think languishing is the right word. There was nothing bad about my relationship. There was nothing bad about my job. It was settled. It was fine. It was meh. And I just don't want to live a meh life. I want to be all in. If that means that I have to give up an okay situation and suffer for a while to find something that's better or worse. I mean, look, there's no guarantees, right? There's no guarantees. But to me, it's worth the risk. And when I tell you I had no plan, I mean, I sold my house and didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. I was not in the greatest state.
People around Rebecca noticed. She was fortunate to have some privilege and stability. She had a house to sell. She wasn't broke. But still.
No judgment. But were people worried about you? Were they like, what is she doing?
Sure. I'm sure they were, August. I'm sure they were. I'm so lucky to have such a wonderful family. We also are, I think, the typical family where it's like, let's talk behind her back and like make sure she's okay. And everybody will just like handle her with kid gloves for a while. I'm sure there were a lot of conversations happening around that. They didn't really loop me in very often, but it was just a, hey, doing all right, kid? Like, everything good? So, yeah, I think there's a lot of concern there. But they also know me. This is kind of my MO. I'm an all-in kind of person. I really believe, there's a beautiful big world out there, and why wouldn't you try and experience it all?
Yeah, and then you had this almost like a push of a gift from your sister-in-law in a way. I don't want to say that her diagnosis was a gift, but like something about, and her handling it with grace and humor and passion and joy. Yeah. Living as much as she could live while she was here, I'm sure, was very inspiring.
Yeah, it's funny. Even as you say that, I think about this research around post-traumatic growth and how often, people who go through traumas, it's not that I would ever wish for that to happen, right? If I could, I would undo that and she'd be here today. But given the circumstances, have I grown? Do I appreciate the growth that I have as a result? And the answer is absolutely. Like it goes hand in hand. The sadness and the happiness and the bittersweet, they're all together in that.
So Rebecca found herself sort of flailing about, but also not. She had taken a leap without a certain net.
I rented an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere. I have no plan. I have no plans. In the middle of nowhere, Virginia. I'm in this house for a couple weeks and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't afford this. What am I going to do? The woman who owned the Airbnb asked me to go to lunch. And we had this delightful lunch. She's like, you really need to meet my husband. And I was like, okay. So they had me to dinner. And this is probably the last day of like rent that I have. Her husband happened to be the Harvard medical director for all of the medical faculty there. And we had this delightful discussion around politics and religion, diversity and inclusion and stress. I was telling him my whole life story. And by the end of the evening, we'd gone through a couple bottles of wine And he's like, we just bought this house down the road and we're renovating it. And if you just want to live there, why don't you just stay? You can help us around the farm a little bit if you have time, but like you're writing a book. And I ended up staying months, and we had dinners a couple times a week together. To me, this is one of these beautiful examples of how in moments of really deep stress and sorrow and difficulty and uncertainty, stress really helps us reach out to each other and not only help one another, but that helps ourselves too. I will always, always, always be grateful for those people in my life.
You do seem like somebody who's ever evolving. So I don't mean this in a way of like this stopped, but where did you land from it? Where did this sort of lead into your next chapter?
Yeah, great question. I decided that I was an author. I decided that I was a speaker.
Some of this had to do with her childhood dreams.
So when I was 8, I loved the theater. I loved the stage. I wanted to be on Broadway. Like, I don't have any talent, so that was a problem. I loved it. And I also love science. And so the more I started using the research that I had been involved in my own life, I was like, this really has to come out of the lab and into people's lives. The timing of this is just wild. I had just given a TEDx because one of my students had nominated me to do a TEDx. And somebody had pulled me aside afterwards and said, hey, would you come speak to my company? So I did, and they handed me a check. And I was like, no way. People get paid to do this? This is amazing. I would do this all day. So yeah, I put out a website, which I'm sure was terrible. I cringe at the idea of looking at my first website and just said, I'm a speaker and I'm an author. And I'll tell you, like, talk about taking a big leap. I emailed one person about my book. I wrote the entire book, the entire manuscript, and I emailed one person about it. And the response I got was like the next day. And she said, listen, this is not how this works. I'm not even a publisher. I am a literary agent, but I like your stuff. And if you want to work together, I think I can sell your book.
That is not usually how it works for authors. Trust me, I know. So does Rebecca now. And she did go through the rigmarole of rejection letters from publishers. But eventually, her book sold, and her career, one she loves, blossomed. I asked her how her big leap and the journey that followed impacted her sexuality or even her relationship to pleasure and intimacy. She had to think about it. She wasn't quite sure.
I mean, I think at that moment I was really disconnected from all of it. I certainly wasn't looking for partners. I don't think sex was even a part of that chapter of my life. It's interesting to think back on that because I don't know if that was a worthiness thing or if that was there's too much else going on and I became other focused, but it was not at the front and center of my world at that moment.
That's also so fine and so normal. I think in our culture, we have these terrible words like dry spell. Or, you know what I mean?
It was a dry spell.
But it was very wet and lush in other ways. Like
right.
Sometimes our sensuality and our sexuality are not front and center, and maybe they're integrated, and maybe it's not time to be exploring, and that's okay.
What I will say is I had a lot of really intimate experiences that were incredibly sensual in their own ways, that were just deep emotional connections. As you asked me that question, I was like, sex? I wasn't having sex at all. But emotionally, I was so intimately connected to a couple really dear friends that I was getting some needs met there that really is, for me, the biggest driver of sex in my life is like, I want that emotional connection. I want that deep intimacy. And so it wasn't being met in a physical way, but it was definitely being met. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. I love hearing that.
Thanks.
Rebecca went on to write another book, which released last month. It's called Springboard, Transform Stress to Work for You.
And it is really about how we can, rather than avoid these stressors, we can invite them in. I call it inviting the tiger in for tea. Our stress response is built for 3 minutes of screaming terror through the savannah, right? Like getting chased by a tiger, lion, and bear. And so we're not getting rid of stress. These diagnoses are going to keep coming. We're going to have divorces. We're going to have breakups. We're going to have awful things that happen in our life. Those tigers are going to show up. Shoot, I mean, the inbox is going to overflow. That's a tiger. So how do we, instead of trying to push them away, how do we invite them in for tea? And get curious with them, name them, get to know them, understand them, recognize that they're there actually to help us realize what's important to us. and then transfer all of that stress energy into something that is useful. So we can fire it in a direction that helps us or helps somebody else rather than sit there and stew in it. Inviting the tiger in for tea is such an important concept to me because too often I think we try and numb out or avoid the tiger. Maybe it's through sex or through drinking or through phone scrolling or, your next dating app or whatever it is. But if we're willing to sit with it and to really get intimate with our stress itself, it really transforms the whole stress journey so that you're not scared of it. I call it my fearless stress formula. You're not fearless. That's dumb. Doing anything without fear is challenging. But if you can fear it just a little bit less, it really transforms the whole experience.
Rebecca shared a few bits of wisdom that she hopes you'll walk away with.
I'll give you 3 really quickly. 1, it's not a tiger, right? It's not an actual life and death situation that is going to kill you in the next 3 minutes. So if it's not a tiger, we can then transfer the energy. And the energy that you get to transfer means you can act as if you're going to have an adventure. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be happy or good or I'm super excited for it. But rather than trying to calm down, we can use all of the energy that stress is really providing to us to perform as if there's an adventure to be had. And then the last thing I'll say is that stress, and this is research that's been documented again and again and again, stress correlates to a meaningful, purposeful life. The highest correlate to a meaningful, purposeful life is past stressful events, current states of stress, and even future worry and anxiety. And if you're sitting there going, I don't believe it, because that's where I was, even as I'm doing this research, right?
As an exercise, she said, try this.
Think of a project or an accomplishment that you are most proud of, and then go back in time to when you were in the middle of that project. What was your stress level? On a scale of 0 to 10, how stressed were you? Data said that 77% of people were stressed out of their gourds. They were really, really stressed out. 23% were kind of in the middle. So most people were really, really stressed out. And it's just a reminder to you that stress is a barometer for how much you care. It's saying this is meaningful. This is important. Pay attention now.
Learn a lot more in Springboard, which is available most anywhere books are sold.
It has a lot of my personal stories, really deeply personal things that are important to me in it. And my hope truly is that people have a transformation in their relationship with stress. Because I promise you, you won't be less stressed by this book. I can't promise you that. And anybody that promises you that they're going to eliminate stress from your life, don't believe them. It's not possible. My hope is that you'll be able to stop punishing yourself for all of these things that are outside of your control and begin to use that stress in a new way that feels healthier and happier and more productive for you.
Find a direct link in the show notes. There you can also find a link to sign up for my personal email list. I send updates about once a month. Ratings and reviews are also super appreciated. Thank you so much for listening.